All right. Well, good morning. Nice to see you here in Sunday school. I was preparing for this morning, and I did this last night. I put a couple papers together. As I told everybody here, I was looking for a fancy drawing I had made of the image that Nebuchadnezzar dreamt. And I think I had drawn a nice one at one time, but either I didn't keep it or I couldn't find it. And that was the end of the story. But this paper shows in the interpretation that Daniel gave to Nebuchadnezzar for the dream he had. And then next to that I have the beasts that Daniel sees in chapter 7 and chapter 8. There's two lists. And I've got them lined up so if you put them side by side, you can see which kingdom they relate to. First off, though, I want to thank Julia for taking the class last week when we were out of town. I know she said it was a struggle, but anybody who has spoken before a group knows that happens. I don't remember noticing. I watched it, enjoyed it, so appreciate that. We started, I guess it's a series. We started talking about scriptural messages about the last days, just the first Sunday of this month. And you can go back to Genesis 49, where Jacob gathered his 12 sons together and spoke to them. He said, I need to tell you of what you will face in the last days, what will befall you in the last days. So the last days are spoken of throughout the whole Bible. Moses wrote the book of Genesis, and he recorded it probably in the 17th century BC, about 200 years after the time of Jacob and his entry into Egypt. And it's really interesting that the very fact that the people of Israel are still walking this earth, the same earth that they walked over 4,000 years ago, is amazing. There's a lot of biblical names of countries that we have no idea who they were. But Israel is still here, and it has an eternal promise. So it's not wrong for us to speak about the last days. God speaks about it many times, but we need to be aware of fantastic prophetic proclamations that can be made in the name of the last days. We don't want to be taken off course by people who are trying to sell a book or whatever. We read about Nebuchadnezzar's dream 2 weeks ago in Daniel chapter 2. I'm going to need you to grab your Bible. Computer doesn't want us to see the Bible this morning. So in chapter 2, we don't want to read the first two verses. It tells us about Nebuchadnezzar and his dream. And it says, Nebuchadnezzar the king... No, I'm in chapter 3. I'm sorry. Chapter 2, verse 1 and 2. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king. The king had a whole bunch of wise guys, wise men, so to speak. And among them were astrologers, sorcerers, magicians, Chaldeans. And I think Julia maybe was the one that asked last week about who were the Chaldeans. And from what I could find, they were people from the southern part of Mesopotamia. Remember, where did Abraham come from? From Ur of the Chaldees. So, from what I read lightly, I didn't study it, but it says that there was a people from the southern part of Macedonia that migrated over to the Babylonian area. By this time, they had been there for a couple years. And really, more than a separate people, when the Bible speaks about Chaldeans, Chaldeans, it's speaking about professional astrologers, people who studied the stars and made proclamations and forecasts and so forth. So the king, do you ever have a dream that you couldn't remember? You wake up, I've had some, I wake up and there's something that I want to remember, and minutes later it's gone. And sometimes if somebody mentions something that they dreamt or something that triggers a memory, sometimes it'll come back, but a lot of times it's just gone. Of course, God used dreams a couple times, well, more than a couple, but with people who were unbelievers, like the Pharaoh of Egypt, and here Nebuchadnezzar, he used a dream to get his attention. And the Chaldeans and all the other wise men told the king that, you tell us a dream, we'll tell you the interpretation. He says, it's gone, but I need to know what it was. I need to know what it was and what it meant. And because they couldn't do that, of course, they couldn't tell him what he dreamt. They were all supposed to be killed. And before they got killed, Daniel says, yeah, give me a minute. Let me sleep on it, because God will tell me what the dream is. And he does. He tells Nebuchadnezzar that he saw an image, and I know this is fine work right here. He saw an image of a great tall statue of a man, and it had a head of gold, had a belly or breast and arms of silver, belly of thighs and brass, legs of iron, feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And it goes on to say that at the end of times, a stone cut out of a mountain would strike the image on its feet, and it would destroy the image. And that stone would become a great mountain that would fill all the earth. A history of governmental power, a history of oversight and rule. And of course, what did Nebuchadnezzar do? He goes and makes a huge image. I forget how tall it was. 60 cubits, 60 cubits. If a cubit is a half a yard, then 60 cubits would be 30 yards, 90 feet, 90 foot tall. And of course, he made it all of gold, right? Because he was the head of gold, so he sees himself in his glory, and he wanted to be worshipped. And that's so much of the way humans are. They worship themselves. Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar that after him there would be another kingdom, and it would be, in comparison to the gold, it would be silver, and all the future kingdoms diminished in glory, but they became stronger as the metal stronger in strength. It's interesting, though, that Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel told him, he says, when you were going to sleep, you were thinking about what's going to happen in the future. You're thinking about the future time. And I guess if you've conquered the world, what do you have to look forward to? What do we hear about Alexander the Great? His conquest was so swift. I thought he was 35, but what I read is that he was 32 years old when he died. I always heard he died of a drunken bout or something, but I read something. Of course, Google. You gotta trust Google. It said that he may have had West Nile virus. So I don't know. It's hard to get good medical reports from that far back, aren't we? But when we go to chapter 7, the image that Daniel interpreted to the king Nebuchadnezzar was the only information that Daniel had as well, until he had a vision during the first year of Belshazzar's reign. Belshazzar was Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. And so let's go to chapter 7. We're just going to read the first part of the vision. We're going to read verses 1 through 8. But if you have, Sarah doesn't have the paper. There's one back by Rachel, or by Sherry if you want. Daniel 7 is outlined with creatures, beasts, that are interpreted in place of the image of gold and silver and bronze and steel. Chapter 7, verses 1 through 8. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. And four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side. It had ribs, had three ribs in the teeth of it, in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. I considered the horns. Behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. The image, the vision that Daniel had here in chapter 7 relates to the same future that Nebuchadnezzar had dreamt about. But Nebuchadnezzar had a view from man's point of view, from a worldly ruler's point of view. He was glorious in his kingdom. But God sees all of this as beastly. There's a lot to be related, and it's hard to get it all done at one time, but in the original dream of Nebuchadnezzar, he saw in the future that there would be a stone that would strike the image at its feet and destroy it all at one time. Now, historically, Babylon was already gone, Greece was already gone, Medo-Persias were forgotten about. But the idea of the unity of the image, it had one purpose. It had one purpose, and that was to rule the earth, to persecute the Jews, really. And so we can see the image of Nebuchadnezzar as a view of Satan's attempts through various government systems, various world rulers, to fight against God's people, God's chosen people. Even in the future, what do we see in the book of Revelation? We see the persecution of the Jews, and we see them being slaughtered in a great number. The scripture that says, He that endureth unto the end shall be saved, has special meaning for the nation of Israel. Those who live through the tribulation will see Jesus return. And the Old Testament says they will weep for those. They will see the hands of those that they had crucified. They pierced. I can't remember the wording. It's in Zechariah. So when Daniel sees the same history, he sees beastly from God's point of view. They're terrorizing. A lion with eagle's wings. The wings symbolize the strength of conquering. The bear from Medo-Persia. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Medo-Persia was the arms and the breast. So there's two sides. Daniel sees a bear that is raised up on one side. Just like the Medes came to power first, and then the Persians, although they were together, the Persians rose in prominence secondarily. And we'll see that. It's pointed out by the bear, as well as chapter 8, the way the vision is there. In chapter 7, there was a leopard seen with 4 wings, and then it had 4 heads. That relates to Greece, and there's more that will be said about that in chapter 8. The last beast could not be described. It said it was dreadful and terrible. It had iron teeth. It had 10 horns. And it said it's, in verse 8 it says, in verse 7 it says, it devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse some beasts that were before it. The Roman Empire was brutal. When they came into a country or people that they were going to conquer, they would just pull people off the street and slay them in numbers, just to strike terror. They were not to be messed with, as a message that they left. Very, very powerful, very strong politically, militarily. But there is a little horn that comes up out of one of the 10 horns. And that becomes the focus of the book of Daniel. This little horn that appears in the future development in the last days, the last of the last days. How did that relate to the image that Nebuchadnezzar dreamt about? He saw the 4th kingdom as being the legs of iron. But if the head is the earliest and the legs are later, what's the very latest point you could put in time relating to the statue? The feet and the toes. How many toes? 10 toes. 10 toes, 10 horns. In fact, I think it is said, and it is stated in chapter 2, when Daniel is given the interpretation. In chapter 2, go to verse 41. Yes, Daniel chapter 2. We'll start with 41. We'll go down to verse 45, because this, relating to the 10 horns in chapter 7, the 4th beast. And this is the image. And as he is explaining, he says, whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, part of iron, the kingdom should be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, forasmuch as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And we're going into the last of the last days, verse 44. And in the days of these kings, the final, where there will be 10 kings working together, there'll be power there, but it won't be united as it could be. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, brass, clay, silver, the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain and the interpretation sure. Daniel is then given this vision of the beast, and he sees this fourth beast with 10 horns, and one little horn comes out of the 10 and plucks up 3 others. So it's related to the Antichrist and how the Antichrist will conquer in the last days, actually during the time of the tribulation. I'm going to go quickly to chapter 8 because the focus is, where does the little horn come from? Well, from Daniel's chapter 7, we can say, if you divide the Roman Empire, if it gets revived with 10 kingdoms, he's going to come out of one of them. So you got 1 out of 10. Do you remember when the common market had 8, 9, or 10 countries in it? Maybe 20 years ago, people were saying that the common market was the Antichrist kingdom. It's not. It was Europe. And it's not powerful, and it's more than 14 countries, or more than 10, I'm not sure how many countries in it now. It doesn't have the power, the strength, or anything, but it's just interesting that those numbers are remembered. We're going to go to Daniel 8 and read verses 1 through 9, and I'll just have a couple comments before we dismiss. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first, 2 years ago. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river Ulai. Shushan was the capital of Persia, so he's still working in the government at this time. Verse 3, Then I lift up my eyes, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns. The 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other. The higher one came up last. That relates to Medo-Persia, the Medes, and then the Persians. And the Persians came up higher. The bear was raised up one side. Here it's 2 horns. The one that came up last reached a higher height. Verse 4, And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, and he did according to his will and became great. So it arose in great power. And as I was considering, behold, a he-goat, we'd call it a billy goat, I guess, but a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. This is Greece. He's touching the ground, he's flying. He is so swift in conquering. It's as if his feet didn't even touch the ground. Verse 6, And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him. Smote the ram, brake his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to stand before him. He cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him. There was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. And for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, toward the pleasant land. That would be Israel. So we have a focusing in on the future. Daniel sees the ram with 2 horns. It's about this next image of the he-goat with a notable horn. Who was the notable horn? Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great. Yeah, he very powerful, very swift in conquering. When he died, the kingdom was split up, not to his children, but to generals and people in armies. And they took like Egypt and Syria, and they moved into 4 directions. And chapter 11 is a hard one to read in Daniel because it talks about the king of the north, the king of the south, and they came against, and there were treaties and there were battles and so forth. But it all relates to the little horn that comes out of one of them. In chapter 7, the little horn, which is the Antichrist, will come out of one of the 10 kingdoms that are a rebuilding of the Roman Empire. But there will be, this is a closer focus, that the Antichrist, in fact, let's go to Revelation. I did have that verse down. We're going to end here. Look in Revelation chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. In the time of the tribulation, which is revealed beginning here in chapter 5. In chapter 4, John is taken into heaven and he sees a vision of the throne. And in chapter 5, did I say 1 and 2? What did I say? I said 1 and 2. That's not what I really want. Well, chapter 5, 1 and 2. I saw on the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within and on the backside, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the book and to loose the seals?" I want to go to chapter 6. That's the verses 1 and 2 I really wanted. But when these seals are broken, there's a vision of what is happening on the earth. Chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, and one of the 4 beasts saying, "Come and see." And I saw, and behold, a white horse. Symbolically, what does white horse mean? In cowboy shows. White hat, it's the good guy. So this guy comes to be a good guy, to appear as a good guy. He came, behold, a white horse. He that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him. And he went forth conquering and to conquer. Now, in Daniel, in the vision, I think it's in chapter 9, it talks about the king that shall come. The one that will come will make a